Nothing good ever happens when you're hanging around in a place where you don't belong. It honestly wasn't my fault. I was stopped at a traffic light when a guy in the lane beside me waved for me to roll my window down. "Your tire's flat," he said. I thanked him, swung my car into the nearby store parking lot, and got out to check. Sure enough, I spotted a screw head lodged in the tread, and air was slowly seeping out. "Great," I muttered. "Just what I needed." I decided to go inside the store to grab a can of sealant. When I got back, I made the mistake of taking the screw out. The air really started hissing then, so I stuck the screw back in and used a gas station pump in the same parking area. I was only about 15 miles from home, so I figured I'd just keep an eye on the pressure. If it got too low, I'd use a can of sealant. After I'd gone another few miles, I checked my tire in the mirror and saw it was getting much flatter. I pulled into a convenience store, hoping they had a pump, but they didn't. That's when I decided to test the sealant right there. I squirted in that green goo. It's funny how they call it goop for a reason, and was relieved to hear the hissing stop. I was about to climb back in my car when I noticed a pickup truck rolling in. It was one of those massive ones with oversized tires, so tall you'd practically need a ladder to hop inside. Something about it looked familiar. A tall, blond fellow in cowboy boots and an enormous belt buckle climbed out. It was almost comical, but my laugh died in my throat when the passenger door opened and a beautiful dark-haired woman jumped out. I recognized her right away. Sarah, the woman I'd been married to for 18 years. My mind blanked out for a second. I was parked off to the side, and neither of them seemed to notice my little company car, which was a modest boxy import that never really stood out. They walked into the store hand in hand, and she laughed right in his face, looking happier than I'd seen her in years. It was like a punch to my gut. Suddenly I couldn't breathe or even move. All I could do was stand there feeling like an idiot. Then it clicked where I'd seen this guy before. He worked with Sarah at her psychiatric clinic. She was the office manager, and he was one of the social workers. I'd seen this same truck outside her workplace. My first question was, what the heck was Sarah doing here anyway? I tried to remember his name. Eventually, it came to me, Dylan Myers. And that brought up the next question. Why wasn't she at work? I was determined to find out, so I got back in my car and waited. Soon they stepped out of the store holding cups of coffee. He opened the door for her, and they roared off in that monster truck. I tailed them a decent distance behind. They eventually pulled up to our house, my house, and drove straight into the garage. The door shut behind them, and I couldn't see a thing anymore. I sat there for half an hour, but the thought of my tire losing air made me nervous. I checked it a few times, but it didn't seem to be going down anymore, so I stayed put for 2 hours, watching and waiting. Eventually, the garage door opened, and they drove back out, passing so close I had to cover my face with a file folder. Not that they would have noticed. She was sitting so close to him, they seemed locked on each other and didn't look anywhere else. I glanced at the time. Sarah wouldn't be free until around 5, and it was already 2:30. That gave me a little window, so I decided to go inside and see what I could find. I also had to figure out some story for our 15-year-old daughter, Amy, when I picked her up from school at 4. My mind was racing, and all I could think was, what's going on in there? Once I got inside, it was strangely quiet. The only noise was a dripping faucet in Amy's bathroom that I'd been meaning to fix. The air conditioner's fan whooshed softly, but that was it. I headed upstairs, trying not to notice anything out of place, but I couldn't help myself. The bed was made, fresh sheets even. That little detail hit me like a rock in the stomach. I leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor, feeling absolutely numb. There was only one logical explanation for what I'd just witnessed. I must have sat there for a good half hour, my mind spinning in every direction. I felt as if someone had drugged me. I was woozy and my stomach churned. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. I grabbed a Sprite from the fridge and chugged it. I was hot and sweaty, so I went to the bathroom, soaked a washcloth, and draped it across my face. The cool water helped. Then I happened to see the shower floor was still wet. Clearly, they'd showered before heading back to work. Returning to the bedroom, I sat on the edge of that same bed Sarah and her friend had just defiled. The thought jolted me. I jumped up, repulsed. This was a crime scene in my eyes. I didn't have a clue what to do next, but I knew one thing. I was done with Sarah. Divorce was certain. The problem was, I hadn't the foggiest idea where to even begin. I didn't know a single lawyer, and I had to pick up Amy in about an hour. And what on earth was I going to tell her? I stumbled back to my car, feeling like I'd been on a 10-day bender. My head was pounding, and I felt like a zombie. Definitely in no shape to drive, but I couldn't just leave Amy waiting. As soon as I spotted her standing near the school door, I felt a tiny burst of relief. She walked over, looking as beautiful as ever, with her dark hair and golden brown eyes, just like her mother, but with streaks of green that made her gaze unique. She flung her backpack into the back seat, sat down beside me, leaned in for a kiss, then froze. "Dad, you look terrible," she said, her voice full of alarm. "What happened? Are you sick? Is something wrong with Mom? Dad, answer me." I had to give her something. "I'm okay, honey," I lied. "Nobody's hurt, nobody's sick. I just need to talk to you. Let's head over to the park. I'd like a moment to hug you and explain, all right? Please? Don't ask anything else till we get there." She eyed me with concern. "Okay, Dad, but you're scaring me." "I know, kitten, but it'll be fine," I insisted, praying it wasn't a lie. It took us only about 5 minutes to reach the park where she'd played since she was little. I'd pushed her on those swings 1,000 times, and Sarah and I used to sit on the benches watching her. They were happier days, and I wasn't sure if all I had left were memories of better times. We sat on one of those benches, and she held my hand, swinging our arms like she used to when she was a toddler. I struggled to speak, but she encouraged me. "Go ahead, Dad," she said. "I'm stronger than you think." "Well," I began, "I'm not sure I'm strong enough." But the words spilled out on their own. I told her every detail of what I'd seen and how I felt. Tears poured down my cheeks while she stayed close, clutching my hand. When my flood of words and emotions finally slowed to a trickle, she scooted even closer. "That doesn't sound good, Dad," she murmured. "We need to go home and ask Mom about this. Maybe the way she explains it will tell us everything. I know how it looks, but we can't be sure till we talk to her." I kissed the top of her head, overwhelmed by how brave she was. She tugged on my hand until I stood up. "You want to drive?" I asked. She'd just gotten her learner's permit, and that idea lit up her face. But the moment she remembered why I'd offered, her expression flickered with sadness. Still, she quietly slid behind the wheel. She drove us home carefully. Sure enough, Sarah's car was in the garage. She greeted us at the door with hugs and kisses, so casual and cheerful you'd think she wasn't up to anything. Either she deserved an Oscar, or I'd completely misunderstood the situation. "You two want takeout tonight?" she asked. "My treat." "Actually, Mum," Amy said, "we really need to talk." "Of course, baby," she replied, still smiling. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Amy answered. "Let's find out." We walked into the living room, and I settled on the couch next to Amy, leaving Sarah with that ugly armchair she'd insisted on buying years ago. She sat there, not a shred of worry on her face. "So, how was your day?" I asked, my voice tight. Sarah blinked a couple of times, looking at me like I was acting strange. "My day was normal," she said. "A pharmacy rep brought lunch from the Onion Shack near our clinic, and it was crazy busy, so I barely had a second to breathe. Why do you ask?" "So you were at work all day?" Amy pressed, her tone sharper than usual. "Of course," Sarah replied, glancing back and forth between us. "Why do you two keep asking these questions? What's going on?" Amy exhaled slowly. "So you weren't home with Dylan Myers this afternoon?" The blood drained from Sarah's face. "What?" "No. Where'd you get that idea? You're accusing me of something? Oliver, what's this all about? I literally saw you, I said, trying not to raise my voice. I watched you walk out of the store with him, hold hands, and then drive right into our garage. You're lying, Sarah insisted, but her voice started to tremble. Amy, I swear I was in the office all day. You can ask Angie, my coworker. I don't think Dad's lying, Mom, Amy said quietly. But I do think you are. And I'm not going to ask Angie anything, because she'll just cover for you. Maybe I should call Carl Henderson, your boss. He probably wouldn't lie for you. I'm sure he'd remember whether you were in the office or not. Sarah's eyes darted nervously, as if she were cornered. He's off today, she blurted. I'll have him call you tomorrow. What are you two even trying to pull here? You think you can trap me in some kind of story? No one's trapping you, I told her, but we know you lied. Why'd you do it? She stared at me, chewing her lip. Okay, fine, she muttered. I was here. I didn't want you giving me the 3rd degree, so I said I was at work. I knew you'd jump to conclusions. Amy's eyes narrowed. Nobody was accusing you, until you tried calling Dad a liar. Now I'm definitely accusing you. Why make him look bad? Mom, are you having an affair with this guy? Sarah looked like a desperate animal trying to find an escape. She finally sighed and spoke. I didn't want it to be like this, she whispered. I just wasn't ready to talk about it. I'm in love with Dylan, and I'm sorry. Things happen so fast. We work together all the time, and we just clicked. I didn't plan it. It just happened. We were waiting for the right time to tell our spouses. We want to get divorces and then get married. Amy, it won't change how much I love you. You can still see your father anytime. Dylan has a nice place on the lake, and he has a daughter. We'll all be... Amy stood up so fast she nearly knocked the coffee table over. Are you out of your mind? She practically shouted. I'm not living in a house with that creep. He looks at me like I'm a piece of meat. I'll be staying with Dad, that's for sure. I don't want you around me. How could you do this? She bolted up the stairs, and we heard her bedroom door slam. Sarah turned to me. She'll calm down, she said, voice shaky. Dylan's actually a really good man, Oliver. I bet you'd like him if you gave him a chance. I'm sorry, but I need to be happy, and he makes me feel alive. I stared at her, trying to process this person in front of me. She bore no resemblance to the woman I'd known for 18 years. At that moment, I didn't even want to argue. It seemed pointless. Sure, I said numbly. Whatever you say. When are you moving out? Moving out? She repeated, stunned. Why would I leave? Dylan's still married, and we haven't sorted out all the details. We need to get divorces first and figure out the settlement. I can't just go stay on the street. No, I told her. I guess you could go stay at some motel that rents by the hour. Probably more your style now. I really don't care, as long as you're out. You've got 3 days. Her jaw dropped. You can't do that. I'm your wife, and this house belongs to both of us. You have no right to... I let out a hard laugh. Actually, I bought this house before we even met, and it's in my name only. It's not communal property. I fully own it. So yeah, I can kick you out. She looked at me, tears brimming. That's harsh, Oliver. No name-calling, please. I didn't set out to hurt you. Sure, I said with a shrug. You just accidentally ripped out my heart. I suppose that's normal for you, right? Well, guess what? You have 3 days. Please, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. It doesn't have to be like this. Can't we still be friends? Dylan wants to be your friend too. We both care about you, and we don't want to lose you. You're a big part of my life, Oliver, and I'm done hearing that, I interrupted, feeling my sadness crystallize into white-hot anger. You think you can cheat and then waltz around like nothing happened? That I'd want to be buddies with you and that clown? Fat chance. Tell your brand new soulmate that if he ever sees me, he'd better sprint the other way. And as for you, I want you out, and I hope I never have to see your face again. First thing tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer. We'll do this divorce as fast as we can. I turned and headed for the bedroom. She trailed after me, spewing more nonsense about how we'd eventually be friends, but I'd stopped caring. I grabbed every piece of her clothing I could carry and tossed the armload into the guest room. She tried to argue, but I didn't listen. Finally, she stayed put to hang up her clothes, and I took the opportunity to lock the bedroom door. My phone buzzed, and it was Amy, texting me from her room. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah, kiddo. You?" "No, but I will be," she wrote back. "I love you." "Love you too," I typed. "You can text me anytime." She asked if I'd take her to school in the morning. She didn't want to ride with her mother. I told her of course I would. Then I lay in bed, trying to figure out what to do next. My thoughts chased each other around until about 3 a.m. when I finally passed out. A few hours later, my alarm woke me. The next morning, I called my boss and explained I needed a few days off. He expressed sympathy and told me to take all the time I needed. I brewed coffee, had 2 cups, then made breakfast for Amy. She came down right on time, looking more like her usual self, and wolfed down her food. A few minutes later, Sarah wandered in, grabbed coffee, and tried to chat. We said nothing. Before long, she gave up and left with a frustrated look on her face. Then I drove Amy to school, and she kissed me goodbye. Afterwards, I got to thinking about a friend of mine, Ethan, who'd just gone through a divorce. I rang him up for the name of his lawyer, but he suggested I use his ex-wife's attorney instead, saying she was way better. He gave me her name, Elizabeth Dawson. So I looked up her number and arranged a meeting that very afternoon. I also took steps to protect my finances. We had a joint credit card, so I lowered its limit to $500. It wasn't my style to cause trouble, but I refused to fund her romance. When I arrived at Ms. Dawson's office, things started off rocky. She assumed I was the one cheating on my wife with someone younger, and I set her straight fast. Once she realized it was my wife who'd strayed, and that I was just trying to minimize the fallout, especially for Amy, she changed her tone. We discussed custody, and I asked if it was possible for me to get full custody of my daughter. Elizabeth explained that technically both parents are equally considered, but in practice, dads often have a harder time winning custody of teenage girls, unless the daughter specifically wants to live with her father. I told her Amy was 15 and absolutely wanted to stay with me. She said that would be a major factor in our favor. I left feeling slightly more hopeful, but still angry and hurt. I drove home, trying to come up with a plan to protect myself and keep everything above board. I couldn't risk doing anything illegal that might cost me custody of Amy. Still, I was set on exposing what Sarah and Dylan had done. First step, let his wife know, assuming she was as clueless as I'd been. Next, I planned to share the news with Sarah's parents, Henry and Linda. They adored their granddaughter, so I'd let them know exactly why Sarah was making this mess. And I decided to give all our friends a heads up too, maybe even put a bit of noise on social media. Sarah managed our family's old Facebook page. I knew my way around it enough to log in, so I posted a note explaining we were divorcing because Sarah had found her true soulmate in a coworker. I even uploaded his photo. Then I changed the password and logged out. I felt a pang of guilt for causing Dylan's wife heartbreak, but I was pretty sure she'd rather know. After that, I called my mom. As expected, she was shocked and upset, but she told me my parents would always be there for me. She promised to let my dad know. Then I figured I'd let Sarah herself explain things to Henry and Linda, because they loved their daughter. But I was done covering for her. It didn't take long for the sparks to fly. Around 2 o'clock, Sarah's name lit up my phone. I answered, and she was livid. "You are such a jerk," she fumed. "You couldn't just leave this alone?" Now Dylan's wife is screaming at me. My parents are blowing up my phone. All my friends want answers. Take that stupid post down, Oliver. No, I told her flatly. You're not my boss. In fact, you should be thrilled. You won't have to hide your true love anymore, right? That's not fair, she snapped. I didn't want it coming out this way. That's the funniest thing I've heard all day, I said. Once you chose to cheat, You lost any right to control the fallout. You have no claim on my respect or kindness anymore, Sarah. Face it, you're the enemy now. She started to say something else, but I ended the call and let the phone ring when she tried again. Then I went to pick up Amy at school and told her about Miss Dawson's reassurance. She was relieved about the custody side of things, but still deeply sad and confused by her mom's behavior. Dad, she said softly, I always knew Mom was a little impulsive, but I never imagined something like this. Me neither, I said. We'll just have to deal with it, baby. I promise I'll do everything possible to keep you out of harm's way. Just don't ever let me be alone in a house with that jerk, Amy begged, and I vowed I would do my best. On our way home, we grabbed pizza, and I was halfway through my second slice when my phone rang. It was Sarah's father, Henry. I showed Amy, and she told me to put it on speaker. Oliver, Henry began, sounding tired and rattled. Sarah came by last night, asking if she could stay with us. She wouldn't explain why. Could you please tell me what's going on? You should ask her, I said cautiously. She told you nothing? She said she'd explain soon, but she hasn't. Please, I'm worried. I took a steadying breath. Sarah's been having an affair with a guy named Dylan Myers. He's married, they're both planning divorces, and they've been together. Henry gasped. That's insane. Are you sure? Amy leaned forward. It's true, Grandpa. I was there when Mom admitted it. I'm so sorry. Then she started crying. Henry's voice trembled. Don't cry, sweetheart. Be strong, okay? I love you, and your grandma does too. Oliver, I'll try to talk some sense into Sarah. Thanks, Henry, I said. Please understand, you and Linda will always be a big part of Amy's life. Nothing changes that. After we hung up, Amy looked worn out, but she thanked me for telling the truth. That was all I could do. Tell the truth and press on. Things actually turned out better than I'd feared, at least as far as court proceedings went. The divorce process was long and stressful, but it never got quite as nasty as I'd braced for. It still hurt like hell, though. Sarah seemed to be living in some fantasy world where she believed she could get custody of Amy without any issue. However, my new lawyer, Elizabeth Dawson, was as sharp as advertised. After Amy told the judge in private that she wanted to stay with me and explained exactly why, the court gave me full custody. The official ruling stated that Sarah had unlimited visitation rights, but only on the condition that Amy never be left alone with Sarah and Dylan Myers together. Turned out that arrangement wouldn't matter for long. Dylan got his own divorce, but apparently the whole soulmate talk was a bit exaggerated, at least on his part. Barely 2 weeks after I found out about his fling with my wife, he'd already locked onto some other conquest. All those big plans about divorces and merging households evaporated like morning mist. It still took about 7 months for my divorce from Sarah to be finalized. She flipped back and forth, even trying to slow it down. In one of our later court dates, she suddenly asked the judge to order mandatory counseling. Despite my lawyer's objections, the judge went along with it, so we were forced into 8 or 10 sessions with a marriage therapist who, to me, looked more like an aging hippie than a professional counselor. On our first day, he told us to state our relationship goals. Sarah launched into a rambling monologue about wanting me to understand her happiness, how she'd never meant to hurt anyone, and all that. When it was my turn, I told him plain as day that my only goal was to sign the paperwork, finish these sessions because I was court-ordered, and finalize the divorce. Mr. Brooks, said the counselor, frowning, don't you want to address the issues that led to this marital crisis? Sir, I replied, I'm here because a judge said so. I don't think my issues caused any of this. I've got no interest in saving a relationship that got burned to the ground. He tried to argue that I could face contempt of court if he reported me as uncooperative. Really? I asked. You'd have to lie to do that. These sessions are recorded. My lawyer would happily subpoena the tapes. I shrugged. I'm not refusing to participate. I'm answering your questions. But if you ask about my goals, I'm telling you straight. My goal is to be done. He didn't seem to like that, and Sarah definitely didn't. She pulled out every trick she could think of, asking me to work on our problems, insisting we could fix what went wrong. But it was too late. One day she demanded, "Oliver, how do we get back to what we had if you won't even try?" "That's the thing," I said. "We can't go back. We'd need to rewind time and erase Dylan. Unless you've got some superpower to do that, there's nothing to fix." She pestered me constantly, but I wouldn't budge. The therapist told me to spend more time alone with her, but I refused to do anything beyond the letter of the court order. Finally, we wrapped up all our sessions, and the counselor sent us back to the judge, who, in the end, approved our divorce. Amy stayed in regular contact with her mother's parents, Henry and Linda, since she adored them. But any closeness she had with Sarah just seemed to wither. They still met up sometimes, especially if Henry and Linda were around, but it was never the same. I hated seeing my daughter hurt, but I understood why she felt that way. Meanwhile, Amy was branching out socially. She'd made a good friend named Kim, a sweet, pint-sized blonde who practically lived at our house. I got such a kick out of having them around, watching them goof off and seeing how well they clicked. As soon as summer break rolled around, the girls wanted us to head out to the lake with my old fishing boat for a weekend. Sounded like fun, so we planned everything. The next thing I knew, a bright red Jeep Cherokee pulled up in my driveway, and Kim hopped out. On the driver's side was a woman who looked like an older clone of Kim. Brown-eyed, light brown hair, the same petite build, same bright smile. Amy rushed over and practically jumped into the woman's arms, then guided her to me. The poor lady looked a little nervous. "Dad," Amy said, "this is Julie, Kim's mom. We, invited her along this weekend." Julie gave me a polite smile and extended her hand. "Hi, Oliver. I've heard so much about you. Thank you for letting me tag along. Honestly, I was a little jealous of how often the girls were hanging out without me." She laughed softly. I threw a quick look at Amy. She shot me a guilty smile, and Kim's eyes sparkled with mischief. My knees felt a little wobbly. Julie was absolutely gorgeous, and I tried not to stare. "Oh my God," Julie muttered, seeing my surprised face. "They didn't tell you, did they? Girls." She spun around, arms folded. "I told you to warn him." They both started talking at once, making excuses. "We're sorry," Kim squeaked, "but Mum, you said you wanted some lake time, and we knew Oliver would invite you if we just nudged him." "They're sneaky," Amy admitted with a grin. "But that's how they operate." Julie sighed. "It's okay, Oliver. We'll just go back home. I'll punish Kim for a month, and—" I gently touched her shoulder. "No," I said. "You're already packed, and we'd love to have you. I'm not a bad guy. Amy can vouch for me. Let's all just have fun. And maybe we can tease the girls a little for ambushing us. How's that?" She hesitated, then peered over at Kim and Amy, both of whom looked contrite and hopeful. "All right," she said finally, smiling. "I'll stay." The girls let out squeals, rushed over, and gave Julie and me big hugs. "Just don't pull that stunt again," I warned them. Kim grinned, putting on a fake evil voice. "We're not good people." The rest of us burst out laughing. We loaded Julie's gear into my van and drove to the lake. It was only about half an hour away, so we still had plenty of daylight. The campsite had a spot to park my boat, so we got everything settled, changed into our swimsuits, and cruised out onto the water. The girls took off their t-shirts, ready to swim, but my gaze got pulled to Julie, who slipped out of her jeans and top to reveal a bikini that fit her like a glove. She was petite, but man, every inch of her was incredible. She noticed me looking, gave me a shy smile, and winked. I'm pretty sure my face went bright red. We spent hours out there, skiing and tubing, with me at the helm most of the time. Julie had a real knack for driving the boat too, so I got my chance in the water. Eventually, we got hungry and headed back to the campsite. Everyone changed into dry clothes, and we lit up a grill to make sausage, fried potatoes, onions, and some beans. Nothing like camp food to raise your spirits. By the time we sat down at the picnic table, we felt like old friends. Julie was so genuine, smart, funny, and easy to talk to. She sold insurance and did financial planning, which meant she was basically a superhero with budgets. She teased me gently about my old boat and van, but it was in good fun. "So, Oliver," she asked, resting her chin on her hand, "what's your story?" I glanced at Amy, who nodded encouragement. So I gave Julie the condensed version. I was divorced, raising my daughter alone after my wife decided to cheat. Julie listened with kind, empathetic eyes. She admitted she'd had Kim young during her last year of college, and that her fiancé had cheated on her too. After that, she focused on providing for her daughter and building a stable life. She looked down, her eyes glistening. "Kim's the best thing that ever happened to me," she said softly, "and I gave up on the idea of romance for a long time. I mean, it's scary to let someone in." "I get it," I told her, reaching over to gently squeeze her hand. "I feel the same about Amy. She's my world." We both glanced over at the girls, who were chatting and giggling in camp chairs. They noticed we were looking and flashed us huge cheeseball smiles. It was adorable and only a little embarrassing. Still, I felt pretty warm inside. We spent the whole weekend together, boating, swimming, grilling, and just relaxing around the fire. By Sunday afternoon, I was half in love with both Julie and Kim. Kim was like a second daughter to me, and Julie had gone from stranger to someone I never wanted to leave. When the weekend ended, I walked Julie to her Jeep. Kim hopped in and waited, and Julie turned to me with a shy smile. "Thanks," she said. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," I replied, surprised at how fast my heart was thumping. "Hey, maybe we could go out sometime, just us." Her eyes brightened. "Like a real date?" "If you're up for it. Maybe next Friday. Dinner, a movie." She gave me that radiant grin. "I'd love that. And Kim can stay at your house with Amy, right?" "That's the plan." I laughed and leaned in. "So, see you Friday at 6? She nodded, then on a sudden impulse, gave me a light peck on the cheek. I swear I blushed like a teenager. I stood there, waving as they drove away, my heart pounding like crazy. Amy practically pounced on me once I was back inside. "You asked her out, didn't you?" she demanded, eyes shining. "Yes. That's fantastic, Dad. She's perfect for you. I love her so much, and Kim's like a sister to me." I smiled, hugging my daughter. "We'll see how it goes, kitten. Don't start picking out my tux just yet." She laughed. "No promises." Our first date was a blast. We played racquetball, which turned out to be hilarious, because Julie was good at tennis and adapted fast, bouncing around the court like she'd been doing it her whole life. Then we grabbed showers, changed, and went out for Italian. By the end of the night, we were stuffed with pasta and wine, sitting side by side in the booth. It felt so natural to put my arm around her. We talked about everything, from our kids to our high school nightmares. Eventually, we had to head home, so I drove her back to her place, and as we sat there in my car, she looked up at me expectantly. I'd have been a fool not to kiss her, so I did. Her lips were soft and tasted like sweet red wine. It went on until we both needed to catch our breath. "I think we have an audience," I said, noticing the curtains in her house rustling. She just giggled. "Probably Kim, sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. I can't say I blame her." She eased her arms around my neck. "Ollie," she said, giving me a nickname that nobody else had ever used. "Thank you for tonight." "Thank you," I said, smiling like an idiot. "Let's do it again soon." "I'd love that," she replied before stepping out of the car. I waited until she got inside and the door was locked. Then I drove home, my head spinning in the best way possible. And that was just the start. Over the next few months, we fell into a routine, meeting every Friday, talking on the phone every day, sometimes sending each other goofy texts or pictures to make each other laugh. We bonded over our kids, our busy schedules, and our shared experiences with cheating exes. Amy and Kim were happy to see us both so content. But the only sour note in my new life was Sarah, who was still around for Amy's sake. She kept trying to meddle. At some point, she found out I was dating Julie and stormed up to me when I dropped Amy at her grandparents' house. "I hear you're dating the mother of Amy's friend," she said, voice dripping with accusation. "Not your concern," I told her. She scowled. "You're still my husband." "Actually, I'm not," I corrected. "And you made that very clear the day you chose Dylan. Remember that? We're divorced. My business is no longer your business, so keep your nose out of it." She stomped away, muttering insults. I told Amy about it, and she was furious. She told her grandparents she no longer felt comfortable with Sarah picking her up. So after that, it was usually Henry or Linda who came to get Amy. By the time I'd been dating Julie for a good 7 months, things had progressed into something serious. We'd go out, talk for hours, hold hands, and share longing kisses. But I'd kept it slow and respectful. We were both single parents, and I didn't want to rush, but the tension was getting real. We'd often end the evening in my driveway, her arms around my neck, my hands on her waist, neither of us wanting the night to end. Then, one night at a quiet little restaurant, she had 2 glasses of wine instead of her usual single glass, or just a beer. She gave me a playful, slightly nervous grin. "I think I'm feeling extra bold tonight," she said softly. I raised an eyebrow. "Good bold, or trouble bold?" She looked me in the eyes. "Oliver Brooks, how come you've never invited me to stay over?" My heart fluttered like I was 15 again. I didn't want to push. "You won't," she whispered, sliding closer. "In fact, I told Kim not to wait up for me." I stared at her, heat flushing my face. "Then what are we doing still sitting here?" She laughed a sweet musical sound and stood up. I wrapped an arm around her, paid our tab, and off we went, practically floating out to my car. She leaned her head on my shoulder as I drove, and her hand squeezed mine the whole way home. As soon as we were inside, I led her to my bedroom, where she pulled me in for a kiss that went on forever. It felt like every bit of passion and longing we'd been holding back came pouring out. We peeled away each other's clothes, piece by piece, and each time I caught a glimpse of her perfect, petite figure. My pulse nearly leapt out of my chest. She was incredible. Silky skin, lithe muscles from all that tennis. When she'd finally shed her last stitch of clothing, I could hardly breathe. She was so beautiful. She whispered my name, then we fell into bed together, wrapped up in each other like there was nothing else in the universe. I won't get into the steamy details, but I'll just say it was everything I'd hoped for and more. She was tender and sweet one moment, then wild and electric the next, as if every part of her wanted me as badly as I wanted her. When our first rush of passion ended, we kissed and murmured words of love, dozed off for a bit, then woke in the middle of the night for more. The next morning, I found her cuddled against me, her head on my chest, her hair spilling across the pillows. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave me the sweetest smile I'd ever seen. "I should have done that ages ago," she teased. "Yeah?" I reached out and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "So you're not regretting it?" She lifted her left hand in front of me, wiggling her fingers. "Maybe if there was something here, I'd regret it less," she joked, but her eyes shone with real emotion. That made me chuckle. "If you'll wait here, I'll be right back." She laughed, rolling her eyes. "I can hold the thought, but not my bladder." She scrambled for the bathroom, wearing just a sheet wrapped around her. I seized the moment, rushing to my office to grab the small velvet box I'd hidden in my safe. When Julie returned to the bedroom, I took her hand, looked into those brown eyes, and said, "Julie Hammond, will you marry me?" I opened the box to reveal the ring, a gorgeous antique piece, crafted in England about 2 centuries ago. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God, Oliver, it's beautiful. Yes." Her voice shook with excitement. "Yes, I'll marry you." I slid it onto her finger. It was a little loose, so we'd need to get it resized, but it sparkled perfectly on her hand. Then she flung her arms around my neck and we fell onto the bed, sharing a rush of laughter and tears. "We have to tell the girls," she whispered after a while. "Yeah," I smiled. "Let's just hope they don't throw us a surprise wedding tomorrow." We both laughed, then she snuggled closer, and I felt more content than I had in my entire life. After Julie said yes to my marriage proposal, I just held her in my arms, feeling a little like a kid who'd gotten away with the world's biggest secret. It wasn't until we caught our breath that we remembered the girls. We half expected Amy and Kim to burst in, squealing about how they'd known it all along. Sure enough, the moment we strolled into the kitchen, wearing these ridiculous matching smiles, we found them sitting at the table with big grins of their own. Amy noticed the ring immediately, even though it was too big for Julie's finger. "Oh my God," she shrieked. "You finally did it." Kim came running over. Let me see. Let me see." They both fawned over Julie, giggling about wedding dresses and color schemes. Julie and I just laughed. Our kids had practically turned us into a couple in the first place. Figuring out wedding plans was the next natural step. We gave ourselves time to enjoy being engaged without rushing any details. We took the ring to get resized, told my folks and Julie's parents the news, and started batting around dates. Before we knew it, we were flooded with ideas about venues, guest lists, cakes, and everything else. It was a happy chaos, and I was thankful every single day that I'd found someone like her. Sarah's reaction word got around pretty fast about our engagement. My ex-wife, Sarah, took it about as gracefully as you'd expect. She cornered me after one of Amy's school events, demanding to know if this is really happening. I didn't feel like giving her any extra attention, so I told her, point blank, that yes, I was marrying Julie, and it was none of her business. She rolled her eyes, muttered something rude, and stormed off. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, my mind was at peace. I had an amazing partner, a daughter I adored, and a stepdaughter-to-be who felt like family already. The only time Sarah's name came up these days was when Amy went to see her grandparents, which Amy continued to do because she loved them. No matter what had gone on between me and Sarah, Amy's bond with Henry and Linda was still strong. A fresh start. Julie sold her house and moved in with me about a month before the wedding, after a lot of discussion with Kim. We all agreed that a single home would be easier to manage, especially for two teenage girls who were now inseparable. We converted one of the spare rooms into a mini hangout area for them so they'd have privacy and space to be themselves. The energy in the house felt fresh and exciting, like our lives were merging in the best possible way. I won't pretend everything was perfect. Merging two families always has hiccups. Once or twice, Kim and Amy got into spats over clothes or the shared bathroom, but Julie and I handled it by reminding them we were all in this together. Even the small arguments seemed to bond us tighter. Every time I felt the stress of wedding planning, I'd catch Julie's eye and remember how lucky we both were to have found each other at exactly the right time. Walking down the aisle, we decided on a cozy backyard wedding at a beautiful little lake house we rented for the day. The ceremony itself was simple, just a few friends, a few relatives, and plenty of laughter. I still get goosebumps remembering Amy coming down the aisle, radiant in a pale yellow dress, and Kim right beside her in matching fabric. Then Julie appeared on the arm of her father, looking more stunning than I'd ever seen her. It was as if a warm light shone right out of her, straight into my heart. We exchanged our vows under a white arch decorated with wildflowers, the water reflecting our silhouettes behind us. I think I actually cried, just a bit, when I slipped that antique ring onto Julie's newly resized finger. For once in my life, I understood what absolute peace and joy felt like. Happily ever after, and a warning. After the ceremony, we shared a huge meal, cut the cake, and danced until it was nearly dark. Amy and Kim filmed it all on their phones, teasing us they'd turn the footage into a romantic comedy video online. We laughed and gave them the thumbs up. Let them do it. I was simply thrilled to see everyone so happy, so at ease. At the end of the day, Julie and I snuck away from the noise, found a little quiet corner by the lake, and stood there watching the moonlight on the water. She rested her head on my shoulder. "We did it, Ollie," she whispered. "We found each other." I kissed her forehead. "We sure did. And that's all that matters." That night, I was bone-tired and happier than I'd ever been. I'm sure life would keep throwing its usual curveballs: money issues, teen drama, maybe even attempts by Sarah to stir the pot. But we had a strong team. We had each other, and we had our kids. So now, looking back on everything that happened, all the heartbreak, the cheating, the legal fights, the tears, and the second chances, my advice is simple. Never give up on the possibility of real, honest love. It shows up sometimes when you least expect it, even if you have to wade through a whole lot of misery first. And if you're the type to follow stories like this, go ahead and subscribe, or do whatever else folks do these days. Maybe it'll keep your next partner from cheating on you. If you're curious about the more grown-up side of life, I've got other wild tales to tell. Though if you're under 18, you might want to steer clear. Either way, thanks for coming along on this journey. Because for me, it had a happy ending I never saw coming.